Welcome to Personal Landscapes. I'm your host, Ryan Murdoch. You can find links for today's episode and other conversations on Books About Place at ryanmurdoch.com. Cam Honan has hiked more than 96,500 kilometers in 56 countries on 6 continents. Backpacker magazine called him the most traveled hiker on Earth. I've wanted to speak with him for ages about his excellent website, The Hiking Life. It's an addictive mix of detailed, quick and dirty trail guides and advice on every aspect of hiking, from trip planning and lightweight backpacking techniques to tips for improving your backcountry skills. I consult Cam's hike summaries before every trip, and I check his site for gear advice. He's also written a number of books with the Berlin-based publisher Gestalten, including Wanderlust Nordics, Wanderlust Himalaya, and The Hidden Tracks. They're beautifully produced and they're filled with photos that'll inspire a journey. So if you have a hiker or a traveler on your Christmas list, this is the perfect gift. We spoke about Cam's favorite Nordic trails, how to go light by ditching your tent and sleeping bag, and why you should see the world at walking speed. A quick note before we jump in. You've heard me mention on previous episodes that I have a new book out this year. It's called A Sunny Place for Shady People, and it's about 6 years I spent living on the island of Malta. I set out to write a breezy island book inspired by Lawrence Durrell, but during my time there, I saw the government of an EU member state taken over by serious criminals. I drew on travel writing, anthropology, and political reportage to show why this could only happen in Malta. I think the roots of it all are deeply embedded in the culture. That little island is a very strange place. There's so much happening beneath the surface, far more than the casual visitor might imagine. A Sunny Place for Shady People is a funny book, at least in the first half, with clashes of culture, history, and strange characters, and then it becomes increasingly dark as events there spiraled out of control. The writer Sarah Wheeler called it True Crime in the Sun. It's published by Trinity University Press in the US, and in a new paperback edition by Mid-Sea Books in Malta. You can find more information about it on my website. If you like the sort of books we talk about on this podcast, then I think you'll like mine. I hope you'll check it out. And now, here's my conversation with Cam Honan. So I mostly talk to travel writers, historians, and biographers on this podcast, so many of my listeners might not know of your work. So let's establish your background straight away. You've been called the most traveled hiker on Earth. Is this true?
I'm not 100% sure, but I guess I'd be in the conversation. I mean, I've been doing it for a very, very long time. I've been around since Moses was in short pants. So, yeah, I think I'd be up there.
So was that because of the 12 long walks that Backpacker magazine had said that about you?
That was when I think that particular article was written, but and probably as far as my website and some of the books go, like that's probably the hiking trip that I'm most well known for. But I mean, I'd already been hiking for more than over 2 decades before I did that particular trip, and so hiking had been a huge part of my life before the 12 long walks trip, and it has been, it continues to be to this day.
So what's the 12 long walks for people who don't know?
Yeah, that was a trip which took place over 18 months, and it was 12 consecutive long distance or through hikes all around different parts of America and Canada. And the overall distance that I covered during that time was, I think, around 14,300 miles, or just over 23,000 kilometers. And that was over 545 days. And so basically it worked out, even including rest days, at over a marathon a day. So over 40 kilometers a day. And that was done over the course of 7 seasons. So often, I'd be walking in snow and minus 10, minus 15 degrees, minus 20 degrees sometimes in some of these areas. So I think in planning that particular trip, a huge part of it for me was wanting to experience as many different environments and many different ecosystems as I could, in North America. So in plotting that trip out, I was looking at I wanted to experience like the Appalachian Mountains in the fall, and the Rockies in the spring or the summer. The High Sierra, also in the spring or summer. The winter in like the Everglades and stuff in Florida. Big cypress, and then some hikes up around the Great Lakes up in Minnesota and the Pacific Northwest, and then also the Southwest area around the Four Corners, which is unique.
Beautiful, yeah.
And so I wanted to incorporate all that in one sort of big trip, and it ended up turning out quite well.
That's the beauty of North America, especially the US. There's so many different types of landscape. I love that desert Southwest, but you've got just about everything packed into that one continent.
You do, you do. I mean, some amazing coastal walks as well. I mean, you look at somewhere like I just got back from a hike through Olympic National Park, which is in the state of Washington, in the very northwest corner of the states, and there you've got this incredible, just pristine stretch of coastline, just filled with tidal pools with sea anemones and starfish, and these sea stacks off the coast. But then you go inland, and you've got this ancient rainforest as well that has this primordial feel. And then from there, you go up in this one national park. You go from there up into this high alpine area, and there's all these glaciers. So you feel like you're in the Karakoram or something. They're all in this one national park. I think it might be the most diverse national park in the States. And but you're right, like the country in general. I mean, no matter what you're looking for, there's something there.
As strange as it seems to say, it must have been hard to stop on a trip like that. Like had to wrap it up and bring it to, because it's like any long trip, I guess. You just spend so much time on the road that it's pretty hard to imagine not being on the road after a while or not walking.
It definitely was like it's I knew, like, I finished that particular trip with what's called the Triple Crown Trails, the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, and the Appalachian Trail. I did them sort of one after the other over, I think it was like 236 days, those three trails. And the last one, the Appalachian Trail, in winter or going into winter. And I remember getting to the end, and the whole 18 months, I'd never had any moments where I was thinking, oh, do I really want to do it? I always knew that this was where I was supposed to be and this was what I was supposed to be doing. But, I think when I got to the end there, I remember I turned around and walked this extra 30 miles back to this road that I'd gone over. And I don't know if you read this story on the website about this place called Blood Mountain. And so, when I was walking back, I was thinking about, I mean, I'd had loads of time to think anyway. I don't know why I was still thinking about stuff, but I was thinking about the fact that I hadn't been racked by doubts or anything like that. I knew that this was what I was supposed to be doing. And as I was walking back, I was thinking to myself, geez, it was the first time that I'd started wondering, I think I've hiked enough. And just the fact that came into my mind sort of made me realize that, yeah, it's time to wrap it up, and go on to the next chapter. But as I was doing it, like I was about 3 or 4 miles from this road, 3 or 4 miles. And the temperature had dropped. It was like in the single digits Fahrenheit. So I think it was around like -15, -16. It was December 29th, 2012. And anyway, it was dark, by the time I got to this place, Blood Mountain. And it was about a 3-mile descent down to this road to this place called Neal's Gap. And I had my headlamp on, and I was walking and I was following this trail, although you couldn't see the trail much because it was just covered in snow. But I heard this call from out of the woods there. And it was like a cry for help. I thought, that's a bit strange because there was no one around, and sure enough, it was this guy who'd gotten lost, and he'd forgotten to bring his headlamp, and he was just out from on a day hike. He lived in Atlanta, and he was out on a day hike. He hadn't brought enough gear. His phone had died, and he was in really bad shape, and And I remember looking at him. I said, "Mate, this is your lucky day." And so I gave him a couple of extra layers and gave him a couple of chocolates and basically shepherded him down to this road where his car was. And I remember thinking, like at the time afterwards, that maybe that was why I turned around and walked that extra 30 miles at the end, you know?
Yeah,
And,
yeah, that's interesting.
so it was one of the most memorable ends to a trip that I've ever had, that's for sure.
Did you ever read a book called A Stranger in the Forest by Eric Hansen? It's about Borneo. That always made
Oh,
me think
no.
of it kind of made me think of your long walks too. Like he walked across Borneo at a time when, there was logging around the exterior, but the interior was just full of tribal people and potentially headhunters. I mean, there were some
Oh,
people hunting heads when I lived 20 years ago, 25, when I lived in Japan. I remember that was a big cover story in Time magazine. The people, they were kind of having an uprising in that area. But when Eric Hansen walked across, they'd seldom seen white people. They looked at him and thought like, this guy's from the spirit world or whatever. It was a pretty dangerous trip, but by the time he made his way across and he met enough of these people that they taught him how to navigate this world, and he came to know their customs and things like this, he got to the other side of Borneo, emerged, from the jungle into like a logging camps and civilization. And he took one look at it, he just turned around and walked all the way back again. So he couldn't end the trip. When he saw what he was coming back to, he thought, not ready.
yeah. No, I can understand. I think for me, I guess heading out in the wilderness has been a part of my life for so long that it's something which I couldn't imagine not doing it. I mean, just I've always been drawn by the simplicity of it, and I think nature has an uncanny knack for bringing out the best in people, and I feel like I'm at my best when I'm out in the woods, and it's a constant reminder that I don't need a lot of stuff. I don't need a lot of shit in my life to be happy. You know what I mean? I could be out there watching sunrises and sunsets, and I've got just a few kilos of stuff on my back, and I can be happy. And I've found that that's one of those universal lessons that you can transpose from your wilderness experiences to your everyday life as well. And it applies equally. That I know, when I'm not on trail, when I'm not in the wilderness, I'm still at my happiest when I'm keeping my life as simple as I can keep it. I think when you're weighed down by, like, I've never met a person who's got a complicated life that's truly happy. it,
Yeah,
uh,
that's absolutely right. No, things don't make you happy, that's for sure.
yeah,
I
yeah.
say this sitting with a huge pile of books right behind me, but that
Books
I
are
was
different.
always.
They're the exception.
It's hard though to lug these things around. I mean, I don't have anything else in here. I moved my desk this way because everything else is so barren in my room. But I accumulated so many books because we lived in a place where nobody read, so I ended up having to buy books rather than use a public library, which is uh, the only kind of things in my life that I've accumulated unnecessarily. But we've always kind of lived in either furnished places when we were renting or like this place here where we had kind of inherited some broken down furniture when we took over this flat. And you always have that choice between, should we get like a comfortable sofa that doesn't transmit acute spinal disorders every time you sit on it? Or should we maybe use that money for another trip? And I just think, yeah, I can buy a sofa, when I'm old. I don't know. It just, there's not much incentive to accumulate things or spend money prettifying my surroundings when I think I'd rather get out somewhere new instead, experience something new. Yeah, and also there's something about the speed of this type of travel. Like the best advice I've ever come across for understanding the world was by the filmmaker Werner Herzog. He said, read, 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 and travel on foot. So what is it about traveling at walking speed that you find most appealing or most rewarding?
When you're experiencing the world at like 4 or 5 kilometers per hour, it really gives you time to soak everything in. You know, I think just getting in almost on Mother Nature's timetable as well. You know what I mean? Sort of waking up with the sun, going to sleep when it gets dark. There's just something that resonates with that. I guess when I'm out in those sort of places, I find myself smiling more. I find myself, my thoughts are clearer. You know, it just makes me feel a bit happier. And my interactions with other people too. Yeah, just overall, I find myself at my best and when I'm out in those sort of places.
All right, so I've wanted to speak with you for ages about your excellent website, The Hiking Life. I consult your trips summaries before every time I go someplace, to see how can I squeeze a hike in here or there. What did Cam do, in this area? And I rely on your site for gear advice too. So how did it come about?
I think I set up the website in 2010, and basically it was a way of giving back. Like, I mean, it was a compilation of different trips that I'd done over the previous 20 years all around the world. And I just wanted to put together a reference tool for folks, so just like what you said, as far as, oh, geez, I'm interested in hiking I'm going to go to Greece. I wonder if there's a cool hike I can do to Greece or the Swiss Alps or Tasmania or Patagonia and it really came about because of that. And when I set it up, I didn't have any social media, and during that, it was not long after I'd set it up that I did that 12 long walks trip, and I still didn't have social media or anything at that stage. And it was only after that trip that I added the Facebook and Instagram and stuff. But really, it was just set up as a reference tool for folks interested in different hikes around the world.
Yeah, there's so much great stuff on there. I mean, it's difficult to. It's a great procrastination device too. I mean, like if I'm working on a deadline or something, I can easily get sucked into your sites, and yeah, I wait eagerly for each new trip summary. But for people who are listening, you've also got books, and I've just finished reading one of your more recent books, Wanderlust Nordics. So it's a beautiful book. It's beautifully produced and it's inspiring, and it had me reaching for my atlas, marking down hikes that I never knew I wanted to do. So how did you choose what to include out of all the places you've been there?
Well, those books, I mean, that was the fifth book I've done in the Wanderlust series. And what you said is pretty much on the mark as far as they're like dream generators, like catalysts to like basically people will see some nice photos or read a little bit about it and go, oh wow, I wouldn't mind going there, and then they'll do their own investigations afterwards. But the Wanderlust Nordics, like the other books in the series, I'll start. Not most of the books feature 25 to 30 different trails, and I'll start with based on trips that I've done in the regions that we're focusing on. I'll put together a list of say 50 hikes or so, and everything from family-friendly day hikes to multi-month wilderness tracks and everything in between, and then sort of gradually sort of whittle them down. And so at the end of it, when we just sort of pick 25, a lot of it will just be to have that sort of cross section between, something that will appeal to folks that are just new to backpacking, to experienced veterans, I guess, who are looking for a big challenge.
So how did you get connected with a publisher here in Berlin, of all places?
Through the website, actually. I think,
oh yeah, so they reached out to you?
Yeah. They as to the best of my knowledge, Gestalt, and I mean they've been around 25, 30 years, but before the Wanderlust books, I don't think they'd ever done much in the way of books about nature in the wilderness. Most of it, was they'd always done coffee table type books, but a lot of it was sort of, cultural aspects, art, travel, but nothing really wilderness centric. And I think they were thinking about doing something like that. And then they probably were Googling different hiking areas around the world, and my website might have kept popping up. So I think that was why they originally reached out.
Yeah, they found the perfect writer for this stuff, that's for sure. So I want to highlight some 2 or 3 trails from this book just to give listeners a sense of what they can expect if they pick it up. Two of them have been on my list for a long time, and then one is now thanks to your book. So tell me about the Arctic Circle Trail in Greenland. I bought the Cicerone book for that like a year or two ago, and that's one I'm really excited to do.
Oh yeah, that's a beauty. The Cicerone Guides, they I'll give them a bit of a shout out because they're a British-based hiking guidebook company, and they've had wonderful. I mean, they've been around. Actually, I think they started in the same year that I was born in 1969, so they've been around for a while. They do hiking. They started off with mainly focusing on hiking, walking guides for Britain, but now it's through Europe and a lot of other parts of the world as well. So yeah, folks are looking for guide, and they do them on Kindle as well for folks if they want to carry a paperback. But the hike itself, the Arctic Circle Trail, is probably, well, not probably, it is Greenland's signature long distance trail. It runs around, well, there's various variations, but the main one folks do runs around 200 kilometers, 124 miles from basically the ice cap to the ocean on the west coast of Greenland. And yeah, it's a gorgeous trail. You can start by going, I mean, the ice cap in Greenland, I think, constitutes about 80% of Greenland's total landmass. So, I mean, it's a perfect way to start. You actually go for a walk around the ice cap and stuff. You can get dropped off out there, and then start walking to the ocean from there. And initially you'll go past glaciers and stuff, but it really is a wonderful introduction to hiking in the Arctic because it's quite a well marked trail, and for folks that might necessarily want to camp, there are huts as well along the way. Yeah, I mean, you're going over Arctic tundra, and you'll see loads of reindeer. Chances are you might see some musk oxen and Arctic hares and Arctic foxes, and during the summer there's lots of lots of berries like crowberries and blueberries, and yeah, it's a good, just lakes everywhere. It's a wonderful introduction to walking through the Arctic.
How is it for bugs? Is it as bad as Northern Canada for just the mosquitoes that just drive you out of your mind?
I think so. Mostly on purpose, I actually started that trip at the very end of August, start of September. I wanted to miss not that the Arctic Circle Trail has a high season. During the high season, you might get maybe 15 people a day. But after the high season, you might only get a few. But I think during like after the snowmelt in June, that's like peak bug season. So yeah, all through June, July, up to basically when the first frosts happen in around the middle of August, it'll be buggy. So it's a real sanity saver. No matter what you do, bring your head net during those times when yeah. So and also if you don't, you really should camp, because some of the huts are tiny and a little bit like what we were talking about before. If there's enough people in a hut, you can always be guaranteed that there's some big bloke who's going to be snoring the whole night. So bring a tent, but if you still don't want to camp in a tent, bring some really good earplugs.
That's such an incredible looking landscape. I just saw some news about a new airport as well in Greenland it's going to make it much more accessible for travel both from Europe and North America, I think. So maybe a good time to go sooner rather than later before the place gets flooded with, not that I could see it getting flooded with tourists, but
it's not, I mean, that hike starts right by the main international airport, which is at this place called Kangerlussuaq, which I think came about during, it's not so much a town as I think that was used by the US military during World War II. And that Kangerlussuaq is the main hub for Air Greenland. And I mean, if you didn't want to go to the ice cap, you could literally get off the plane and start walking west, until you hit the ocean. And so it's very easy from a logistical point of view, that hike.
Okay, that's very high on my list. Another place that's been on my radar for ages is the Lofoten Islands in Norway. I didn't know there was a hiking route that ran the whole length of it.
Yeah, well, it's these folks at this website called Rando Lofoten, which is a great website. They put together, basically they linked up a collection of different trails, and it runs about 160 kilometers or 99, 100 miles right through the heart of the archipelago, and on I think it's 4 or 5 main islands. And the lofties are just it really is a wonderland. You've got these, it's right this archipelago. It might be, well, it's definitely one of the world's most beautiful archipelagos. And it's in the Arctic Circle and off the coast of Norway from this town called Bodo. And you go out on a boat and you're coming closer to it. And I mean, there's these huge granite peaks and these picture postcard fishing villages and these yawning fjords and these beautiful glimmering mountain lakes everywhere. And it's just incredible. It's definitely one of the most dramatically beautiful landscapes I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, the photos are amazing. So one of the reasons I haven't been to Norway yet is because it's so expensive. So do you have any advice for keeping the costs down in a place like that?
Hike. In a word, the thing about Norway and pretty much all over, actually, with the notable exception of the Faroe Islands, you can wild camp anywhere pretty much because there's this freedom to roam, and look, if you're staying in hotels, even you know, even dodgy hostels or very, very simple sort of bare bones hotels will set you back, 150, 200 euros often in Norway. Greenland's the same. But if you've got a tent and you've got a grippy supportive pair of shoes and a backpack, then you can camp out in some of the most beautiful places in the world for free. And so it's just a question of getting to those places and then look, if you buy most of your food in the supermarkets, I mean, it's still more expensive than most other countries, but it's not outrageous. Like if you're just eating in flashy restaurants and staying in, fancy hotels.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about is is it comparable to Iceland in terms of like the cost of groceries and stuff? If you're
Yeah, similar.
We're like going out for dinner is like a hot dog because that's even a hot dog is so expensive.
Jeez, it's Iceland. I was there the last time was actually last year, and one thing I did discover on this last trip, they've got this chain of supermarkets called Bonus, which which has the emblem of this little pink piggy, and I think they sell T-shirts with a pink piggy on it. But those supermarkets, by Icelandic standards, aren't. I mean, there's some bargains to be had, and Iceland's just what I was saying with Norway as well. Like you can basically once you're out of the towns and stuff in Iceland, you can camp anywhere you like, and it can make a really expensive country like the Nordic countries like largely affordable. I mean,
Yeah.
once you've paid for your airfare to get there, you might spend a night or two, just sort of getting everything sorted. And often, if you do have extra stuff like town clothes, and if you've stayed a night in a hotel, normally the folks are pretty good about letting you leave a bag there while you head out. Like when we were in Iceland this last time, we stayed a night in Reykjavik and basically left our gear at this hotel for the next month, until we got back, and then stayed a night at the end of the trip. And that was it. We stayed 2 nights in a hotel over a period of 5 weeks.
I found too, if you just get away from the ring road, like where everybody was around the ring road, you were kind of railroaded into or herded into campsites you had to pay for them and they were quite crowded. But in the interior, there was nobody. And to go that Arctic desert of the interior is just incredible. That's like the closest you can come to being on another planet, I think.
It is. I mean, it's definitely if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you definitely feel like you're channeling your Frodo and Sam, like, and they've got the volcanoes for it too. But it is a starkly beautiful landscape that just it's incredible because I mean it's just this geothermal wonderland. You've got these hot springs everywhere, and but it's one of those places where you've really, if you are going to go up the beaten track in Iceland, you've got to have your stuff together as far as just knowing that you're very exposed to the elements because there's virtually all the forests were chopped down 1,000 years ago. So there's not much in the way of natural windbreaks. So you want to make sure that, you're camped in places where you're not going to, channel your inner Mary Poppins and get blown away during the night,
The wind is just incredible there. Yeah.
it really can be brutal, and often that was one trip. Well, on most trips I'll do this, but I was always getting up to date weather reports pretty much every day on those, those little satellite messages,
Mhm.
Garmin inReach, and so you can get really accurate um, updates on the weather. So I knew a big storm was coming in, which is actually like what happened to us during that Icelandic trip. I think it was so bad that they actually closed down the airport. This was early September last year in Reykjavik. So we knew this storm was coming. So we actually made sure that we knew where the location of this emergency hut was. So we sort of got there, bunkered down in there, and sort of rode out the worst of it there.
I was on a magazine assignment there, so I had a 4x4, and we had to
Yeah.
go to all kinds of places all over the island. But I remember when you sign the car rental agreement, they say something about like if the door gets bent backwards completely because of the wind, it's your fault. So like hang on to the door when you
Oh,
open it
really?
because it'll fold completely, and it'll just fold it the other way and ruin the door. There were a lot of
Yeah,
river
yeah,
crossings too with this truck, which was fun. But I really like the people there
yeah.
too. Like, the other thing too about the weather, I found because we had this 4x4 and we're going to different places. If we were in a place that was really crowded or the weather was a bit shit, you'd go on that Iceland weather app, and chances are it's nice just over there, half an hour away or an hour away, so you could just drive down to some. I had a bunch of topo maps, and I would look for places without any settlements, or it just said like abandoned farm, and there's just a scattering of those places, and we'd head for those areas, and you'd camp out there. There'd be nobody around. So it was very easy to find good weather if you're a little bit mobile, but also and to get away from crowds because everybody went to the same places, and the people were really great too. Like when you did run into Icelanders, they're very strange people and great sense of humor. I
Yeah,
saw the strangest
yeah.
shit there. Well, there was one
It,
place. There's a film. Have you ever seen this? It's called I think it's Cold Fever. It's about a Japanese guy whose parents were killed in it's by an Icelandic director, and his parents are killed in the car crash, and he goes back to Iceland to try to find, what happened to his parents and recover his past or whatever. And he's not prepared, and he's caught in a blizzard, and the car dies, and he's like at the point of freezing to death. And he looks up and he sees this woman standing outside his car, and she howls in this really unearthly way, and then suddenly the engine starts, and he turns around, she's not there. I think I had something like that. So I was driving off the track, and you can find on these maps, you can find really small 4x4 tracks. You're not allowed to drive off road in Iceland, but you can find these tiny tracks and sort of link them up and get really far from anything. And I'm driving down one of them, and I know there's a river crossing up ahead, and it looks too high for what I've got. And there's this raging river beside us, and we're driving and driving, getting farther and farther in. It's getting dark out, and I'm thinking, I don't know if this is going to go very well. And we come over the hill, and I see this guy in a truck, and it's sitting in the middle of the stream. And I'm a bit shocked to see people out that far. And then I remember thinking, God, he's going to be pretty happy to see me. Like maybe he's stuck. So we drove down a little bit closer, and I got closer, and I got out of and he's washing his car, like in the middle of nowhere. And I went over to him, and with my map, and I showed him where I wanted to go, and he said, "No, you don't go that way. It's really bad. Like you'll get bogged down for sure. It's a huge raging river or whatever. You better go back the way you came and take this other track." And I said, I thought you needed help when I came over the hill, but you're just there washing your car. Like, what's going on? He just said, well, there's nothing else to do out here, man. And as I drove over the hill, driving away from this place, I thought, like, we just saved ourselves potentially, getting bogged down in a raging river. And I stopped and I thought, I wonder if that guy's really there. Like, if I went back, would he still be there? Or is that like that movie where the girl screamed? Like, is this just a spirit of the land, that because we were respectful and, camping carefully out there, that Iceland was kind of the old gods were looking out for us?
maybe it's definitely those river crossings. If you're hiking across the Icelandic interior, they're one of the biggest things you have to take into account because they're all glacially fed rivers, and so just finding the right spot, crossing at the right time of day as well, because glacial rivers are always going to like be at their lowest point early in the day, after night time, and but then just finding the right spot. I mean, that if I had to say the biggest challenge beside the winds, it's the river crossings. Just making sure you're crossing the right place and you don't get swept away.
What about drinking water out there too, like in the desert interior? Because a lot of the rivers you see are just loaded with glacial sediments. I mean,
Glacial silt. Yeah, yeah. It's there are a few stretches where yeah, like a strong stomach can definitely help. Like you'll maybe put a one of those paper coffee filters over your bottle or something while you fill up. Because water's okay to drink, but it can be pretty silty. And but even in those sort of places, often you might have to carry water for a day or a day and a half, but you can still find springs, in a lot of those different places. So yeah, it wasn't as bad as you might think, even though it's like this huge, big volcanic desert. Uh, there are places you can still find water.
so what's your preferred method for treating water? Like, you don't carry much. Like you're not carrying a big bladder on your back or anything for, multiple liters or whatever. Like you're just carrying a bottle and topping it up as you go.
Oh, it all depends. In a place in a place like Iceland, there were a few stretches where if I know, okay, I've got 40 kilometers to go from here to this next water source, I'll say, well, okay, what time of the day am I hiking? How hot is it going to be? And I know how much water more or less that I'll need, so I might carry 3 or 4 liters for that stretch. But if I'm in a place like Scotland or the Appalachian Mountains or Tasmania, where I know there's water literally everywhere, I might only carry, half a liter at any one time because I know I can just, you know, find water everywhere. But then I've done other hikes in places like the Bolivian Altiplano or the Badlands in South Dakota. I mean, that Badlands hike, where according to Fisherville National Park information, there was no potable water at all. I started that with 12 liters of water,
Wow.
and that was all in. I think I had like 5 different 2 liter platypus bladders plus a couple of 1 liter bottles. So before I'll go on one of these big trips, I'll do my due diligence, and I'll know more or less where the water sources are, and just adapt accordingly.
That's an amazing landscape. The Badlands in South Dakota.
Yeah, yeah,
Just
that was
otherworldly. That's an amazing place.
yeah, yeah. No, I put together a route through there back in 2016 from one end of the park through to the other, and yeah, there were some challenging sections, and definitely the water was one of the biggest aspects. But it was just amazing, the wildlife there, like seeing a few buffalo and stuff like that, and antelope, and yeah, it's just this. It's another one of those starkly beautiful places that there's not many areas like the Badlands.
I didn't expect it. That was my first magazine assignment for this magazine back in Canada. They said I just missed a trip to Israel. I think I was away, and I missed a really exotic trip, and they said, "Well, do you want to go to South Dakota?" Okay, yeah, why not? I'll do anything. And when I hung up the phone, I thought, Jesus, like, what am I going to write about there? How am I going to make this interesting? It was one of the best places I've been. Like the Badlands was so cool. They hooked us up with this local kind of hunting and hiking outfitter guy. And he was just like a guy who liked being out there on the trail. So he brought some gear for me and this photographer. And we, the photographer was out taking pictures of stuff. And this outfitter and I, we went to one of those tourist overlooks. Like that was the easiest way to get down in there.
Yeah.
And he just tied a rope around it and we rappelled down into the place and went off for the day hiking around. And when we came back, the rangers were standing there. The park rangers says, "That your rope?" Yeah. Well, we, luckily we had found like this huge bighorn sheep skull that they were quite anxious to go out and
Yeah,
recover.
bighorn
So
sheep as well. Yeah, yeah, bighorn sheep.
there was, but we ended up, we hiked down in there the next day. We went out for just a few days with this guy, but we packed out a bunch of water, came back and got some other stuff and packed it out and kind of established a spot so we could hang out down there for a few days. And I got charged by buffalo, I think at least twice, 2 to 3 times because of the photographer. Like, just a little closer, back up a little more. But God, that was such I always, so when I saw your trip account of that, I was so envious. Like ever since then, I've always kind of in the back of my mind wanted to go back and get in there deeper and spend more time down there.
Yeah, just don't get too close to the buffalo to take a photo.
I learned that. Yeah, I learned that lesson. They can outrun you, that's for sure.
Yeah, they look really big and slow, but it's a bit like grizzly bears. They're actually quite quick.
Oh God, yeah. So have you had any close grizzly bear encounters?
Yes, yes, I have. I think the first one was in Denali National Park back in 1998. Um, that was the first time I was ever charged by a grizzly bear, and then
Wow.
again in what was it? Actually, during that 12 long walks trip we talked about earlier, during the Continental Divide Trail section up in Glacier National Park, which is right near the northern terminus of the hike. And I was coming along this area, I think it's called the Highline Trail, late in the afternoon. And actually, it's one of the best photos I've got on the website because I generally just have a pretty average camera, but I came around this corner and there was this mama grizzly bear, and these two almost sort of fully grown cubs sort of walking along like elephants in a circus. And and I sort of came around the corner, and there they were, just maybe, maybe 20 meters away, 25 meters away or so. And I, I stood still, raised my hands, started speaking in as strong and as calm a voice as I could muster. And the mother bear, reared up on her hind legs, all 9, 10 feet, and I was like, whoa. And I kept talking, and thankfully, as soon as she sort of realized, that I was there, and they just skirted down this scree to the left, and left me be. But yeah, they're just magnificent animals, and generally speaking, if you I mean, you can always be unlucky. There was this one time in the Canadian Rockies where this big snowstorm came, and I had to take refuge under this big tree, and I heard this rustling on the other side of the tree. I thought, oh, what's that? And I looked around, and it was a grizzly bear cub. And I thought to myself,
Oh,
because that's the one thing you don't want to get surprised. Like, one surprise bear will get between a mother bear and its cub. And I thought, oh no. I half expected to to feel this big tap on the shoulder, something from the mother bear, but I just sort of walked. I forgot about the storm. I just walked slowly back, just praying that the mother bear wasn't right there, and thankfully it wasn't. But so there's been a few encounters over the years, but oh look, I think it's one of those things with bears. You've got to take, when you go out to those wilderness areas, I think people should remember that 85-90% of bear encounters happen in popular campgrounds. Like, you go to Yosemite Valley in California, there's a reason why they have bear problems there, because people are careless with their food, and they're trying to get too close to bears and stuff like that. If you take basic precautions when you're out in remote wilderness areas, like not cooking where you're camping, you know, sort of eating food that don't have like a strong scent and stuff like that, and just obviously, if you see a bear close up, never run. Do you want to trigger their chase instinct? But if you take some basic precautions, you know touch wood, chances are you'll be fine.
yeah. I hiked through a grizzly infested bit of the Northwest Territories years ago as well for this magazine, and the Canwell Trail up from kind of the Yukon border towards Norman Wells. And I remember we were supposed to be carrying bear spray or whatever, and we had to get dropped in by a pilot at that end, like a bush pilot dropped us in, and he said, "Oh, I forgot the spray, but I'll put it in your next, your first food drop." Like every 5 days, he had a food drop for us, and yeah, you'll be fine. So we're talking to these wildlife guys before starting out, and they said, "Oh yeah, by the way, there's a grizzly like in the first valley up there, so kind of watch out and don't camp around there. You might want to just keep going past." So day one on the trail, and we're hiking out there, and you start seeing fresh turds, really, and then I saw a footprint bigger than my boot, and they're just getting like steaming fresh. We're walking beside a stream. It's really noisy, so probably it can't hear us coming, and it's obviously up ahead of us on the trail. Like, you can see the tracks. So we're shouting and making a lot of noise, and then suddenly we heard a crash right ahead of us. And this photographer grabbed me, and we just kind of froze. And this grizzly darted past and ran towards the stream and just looked back at us over his shoulder like, "Fuck are you guys doing here?" Like, just this annoyed look on his face, Oh man, I thought I had a heart attack. It's just that sudden encounter with that. But we saw bear traces all the way through that trail for the most part, and we didn't have any trouble with them. As you say, just cook somewhere far away and
Yeah.
be careful camping.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times, as beautiful as that little lake might look, or sometimes it's not so good to camp right by a water source, in an area because bears are often there at dusk and dawn when they're most active, or obviously you don't want to camp near berry patches and stuff like that, even if you're blueberries and salmon berries. But so it's just stuff like that you've got to have in your head. And um, I mean, actually, when you mentioned the Yukon, to this day, the biggest bear I ever saw was in Kluane National Park in the Yukon, and yeah, yeah. I mean, once you go up there, the Yukon, Northwest Territories, different parts of Alaska. I've never been to Kodiak Island, but in those other areas, you do see some big ones.
Okay, so I got to ask you one more from the book
Yep.
before I forget. One of the trails that you covered in there, I'd never heard of, and now I'm really interested in it. The Arctic Trail near the top bit of Sweden. Like I really like deserts and barren landscapes. The landscape of that one looked absolutely incredible.
Yeah, that is it's definitely not a well known. It's more of a route than a trail. It runs anywhere from 700 to 800 kilometers, depending on route choices, and it's basically like a traverse of Lapland, or a big part of Lapland, because it incorporates. I think it's around, give or take a few kilometers, but it's about the same distance in Norway and Sweden, around 350 kilometers in each of those countries, and about 70 kilometers or so in Finland. And but a lot of it is over Arctic tundra and these wide open landscapes where you might see herds of reindeer, and it's yeah, gorgeous part of the world. It goes past what what probably is the most famous long distance hike in the Nordic region, which is the Kungsleden in Sweden, which translates to the King's Trail. And that in that Arctic Trail, it actually incorporates a section of the part of the northern section of the Kungsleden. And I mean, that's a hike. I had to say, probably the most popular long distance trail in all the Scandinavia. I think it'd probably be the Kungsleden, and for good reason. It's a beautiful area around there too. You have another national park by the name of Sarek National Park, and people often talk about it as the last great wilderness in Europe. I mean, um, if you're going to see moose and bear and lynx, and I mean, even though you'll be lucky to see some of those things, but that'd be the area where you've got some real good wildlife spotting opportunities.
You had a write up about that on your website, didn't you? You did part of the King's Trail and then you continued up into that park and just kind of went
Into
off
Sarek.
wherever you felt like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
remember reading that quite a while ago.
That is going back a few years, 2009 in Sarek, and um, yeah, I think that's actually one of my favorite places that I've hiked in Scandinavia. I mean, they say it's like a trailless wilderness, but there are a few trails there, and there's definitely game trails that you can follow. But there's not much in the way of infrastructure like what you see on the Kungsleden. And like, you're not going to find a bunch of huts, or I mean, there's one or two like hunters' huts and stuff like that. But for the most part, once you're out there, yeah, you've got to have your stuff together. But I mean, the payoff is just it's definitely one of the most beautiful parts of northern Scandinavia.
So would that be your favorite area for hiking in this region, or because
Oh,
there's so much to choose from. Each country seem to have different pros and cons, or different highlights, really different types of highlights.
man, it's like picking your favorite color or your favorite kid. It's I mean, one of the wonderful things about the Nordic region is, yeah, you've got that wide open sweeping landscape up in the far north in Lapland, but then you go over to Finland, and it's just, I think it's the most forested country in Europe, and you've got you know thousands and thousands of lakes everywhere. So it's a more sort of serene, almost meditative sort of beauty. And then you go over into Norway, and places like the Lofoten's, where these incredible serrated peaks out in the middle of the Arctic Ocean, the North Atlantic Arctic Ocean. And but then you go down further south and you've got fjord country, some of the hikes there in the fjords. And when you go over to this was only a place that I went to for the first time in 2022, the Faroe Islands. And that was a
Yeah.
surprise. That was gorgeous, and it packs a lot into a really small place, but my word, there's some beautiful hikes in these old villages with the turf roost cottages, and it's like you half expect to see trolls and stuff poking their heads out, and it's gorgeous. So and then Iceland. I mean, there's nowhere quite like Iceland. It just has this singular beauty, which I mean, the interior is incredible, but then you get up to I don't actually. I think I just talk about it in the bonus track section, but one of my favorite places in Iceland that not a lot of people go to is called the Hornstrandir Peninsula. And that's up in the far northwest corner of the island. And there's nothing up there. There's no infrastructure at all. Like you have to get a boat up there. And it's amazing. Like there's Arctic foxes running around everywhere. It's I think it's the most remote part of Iceland, and um, yeah, I did a week's hike there before doing a north to south traverse of the country, and but that week in Hornstrandir was definitely one of my favorite hikes in the Nordic region.
Yeah, the Faroes is really of interest to me too. I bought some topo maps for there. I was trying to convince my wife to go there with me, but she has kind of limited vacation time, and I keep choosing all these really obscure places. She said, "You're on your own. If you're going there, you're on your own." I wanted to do it for a magazine, and I needed a photographer to go with me. That was kind of why I was trying to rope her into it. But
Oh no, I was going to say, like from where you are, basically just go up to Copenhagen, and there's some really affordable flights with Scandinavia
yeah,
to the Faroe Islands. So
that's really easy.
yeah, once you get over there, I mean, I I got a bus pass. I think they've got this really good bus system, which you never know. I mean, because I think to rent a car in the Faroe Islands, I mean, yeah, like it's pretty expensive, I think, but you can get around to most places on this bus system, and then a combination of buses and hitchhike to some of these places, and so it can be a bit more. And there's places to camp. Um, Strictly speaking, in the Faroe Islands, it's a one part of the Nordic region where wild camping isn't permitted. But there's sort of like there are affordable campgrounds and stuff, and there's no long hikes there, but there's loads of amazing day hikes you can do.
Yeah, it looked really appealing. A good friend of mine, Lawrence Millman, he's an American writer. He wrote a book called Last Places, where he traveled across the kind of the Viking routes from
Okay.
the Shetland Islands to the Faroes to Greenland and Iceland and then Labrador. And the book covers those territories. But he was writing about the Faroes and he hanging out there for a while. And some people said something about reference trolls living at the top of this one kind of craggy, sharply peaked island. And they told him a story about how, there was a local guy. Nobody lives there anymore. Oh, yeah, that's what he said. They said, he asked about this island. They said, yeah, nobody lives there anymore on account of the trolls. So what are you talking about? Well, there was some people living there, but they had a small kid, and the trolls took it one day and took it to the top of this peak. And by the time the parents got up there to try to rescue the kid, it had died from exposure or whatever. And he said, are you telling me you believe in trolls? And the guy looked at him and said, nay, but they're there anyway. So
So
you might want to be cautious when hiking in some of these places, even if you don't believe in these things. It
yeah,
doesn't matter to them.
one of my favorite hikes in the Faroes is this one from between these two little villages. One's called Saskun and the other one's to Jornavik. And I think Saskun's got a permanent population of 11. And Jornavik's like a metropolis. It's got 40, I think, people. And this hike goes over this mountain pass. But as you're up on the pass and when you're down in Jornavik, which is actually a really cool surfing beach as well, from what I've been told, you look out and there are these two really prominent sea stacks out in the water from Tjornavik, and it's got a similar sort of legend about these two trolls that did they come over from Iceland or something, and they were working there, And trolls aren't the smartest of creatures, so they were working so hard that they forgot about that the sun was going to come up soon. And anyway, the sun hit them, and they got stuck there. And they're these, it's a is it a witch, a troll and his witch wife or something like that are stuck there in these two sea stacks out from Tjornovic for eternity.
That's what I liked about places like that in Iceland. You know, there's so many stories. The landscape is just peppered with stories from the Norse sagas all the way to these sorts of things. And I remember meeting a fisherman in Iceland, and he told me they would divert roads around potential elf homes or homes of trolls. They wouldn't build straight across it.
Not far from there, Akureyri in Iceland, there's this town called Husavik, and it's actually just become a lot more famous in recent years since the actor Will Ferrell.
Mm.
Yeah, from Saturday Night Live. Yeah, he did this movie called Eurovision, and it was basically this comedy about this Icelandic singing duo, and it was set initially in this seaside village called Husavik, and yeah, elves play a prominent role, and, in this particular film. But I remember when I started this, my partner and I started this hike across Iceland. We both quite, got a few chuckles out of that film. So the last place we went to before we started the long hike was to go to Husavik to visit some of these places that were in Will Ferrell's movie. And you could actually see the little elves home and stuff like that. And yeah, like those myths and legends you'll find all over the country. Actually, another interesting thing about that area is there's did you know, like before the Apollo space missions in the 1960s, the astronauts from the US were sent over to Iceland, and Husavik was one of the bases. And from there, they went into the interior near Askja volcano. And so, you had Neil Armstrong and the boys sort of out there. And it wasn't so like there was a place on Earth that most resembled the face of the moon, but I think they were mainly there to sort of get used to like the type of geology or similar type of geology, some more rocks that they'd find when they were actually on the moon. And so it's got a really interesting history too, as far as the Apollo astronauts back in the 60s.
That's amazing. Yeah, and it's just an otherworldly landscape. It's such an interesting place. Okay, I want to ask you a couple more general questions, but these are mostly for me. But I think they'll interest anybody who likes hiking or the outdoors. So you're known as an ultralight hiker, taking as little as possible as a lesson that we normally learn the hard way. At least I did. But so, what are your top tips for lightening the load?
Initially, focus on your big three items. That's where most of the weight savings will be had, and by that I mean your tent, your backpack, and your sleeping bag. And, over the last 25, 30 years, there's been all sorts of innovations in backpacking gear design. And, now, I mean, for my first 10, 12 years backpacking, I was carrying the 80, 90 liter backpack, that weighed 3.5 kilos. And I was carrying the 4 kilo Four Season tent and the super heavy sleeping bag, and I wore the big leather Scarpa boots because that's what you did when you hiked, and but I mean, there's a lot of items now that, I mean, look, there's still some times, like if I'm hiking in the middle of the winter and it's snowy and it's well below zero, then yeah, I'll still wear, because of the risk of frost nip or frostbite, I still want to basically keep my feet dry, and so that's when I'll wear boots. But otherwise I'll wear trail runners, for virtually all my hiking in 3-season conditions. And that's another place where folks can definitely save a lot of weight, is their choice of footwear, because often folks will overcompensate and think, oh geez, I need to wear heavy boots, or I need to, and the thing about, like with backpacks, for example, if you buy an 80, 90 liter backpack, there's something about having a pack that big that you tend to try to fill it. You know what I mean? Like, whereas if you've got a smaller pack, then you're sort of limited. You think, oh, okay. And I think that's the whole key. Besides focusing on those three big items, the the main thing to remember, focusing on necessities rather than superfluous luxuries. You know, um, just really before each and every trip, go through every item and ask yourself two questions. One, do I need it? And two, what will happen if I don't have it? And I think folks are often surprised the amount of stuff that they carry just out of habit rather than necessity. The other thing, which I think, a lot of people think ultralight hiking is, really just been around like the last two decades or so, 2.5 decades. But I mean, if you think about a big picture, I mean, the native inhabitants of places like Australia and the Americas and sub-Saharan Africa, they were covering vast different distances on foot, for thousands of years and without all the fancy gear and stuff. And basically they had that same mindset of that just, I mean, it was obviously you needed to have the knowledge and the skills, but, focusing on the necessities rather than luxuries, because I mean, the payoff is that, your pack is going to be so much lighter, which is better for you physically, because you're not going to have the same risk of getting those stress repetition type injuries for your lower back and your knees and stress fractures in your feet and your Achilles. But also your mind. I mean, even though there's no universal blueprint as to how you should backpack, I think one thing which everyone can agree on is it's a lot more enjoyable if you're not carrying the kitchen sink on, and
That is ever true, yeah.
Oh, it is, and it's amazing if you just and the thing about it is you don't have to compromise safety or functionality to do it. There's more than ever, and now with the internet and stuff, it's not that hard to find a lot of these items that it can just make your experience just so much more enjoyable.
I want to ask you about a couple specific things. So you use a tarp tent rather than a normal tent, right?
Depends on the trip. There's sometimes I'll just carry a tarp, which is sort of an open-sided type shelter. And then there's other ones which tarp tent's the name of a company that's based in the US.
Okay.
And yeah. Even though it's got tarp in the name, it's actually they sell these single wall shelters, which are sort of like tarps, but like the traditional tents are the two layers, like you've got the inner and the outer. And most of the tarp tents are sort of single wall, although I think they do some double wall now, but it really depends on the type of trip. If I'm going into an area such as the Scottish Highlands or the Altiplano in Bolivia, where I know, the potential for high winds is really strong, I will take an enclosed shelter there. Yeah. So a lot will depend. Same with like, say, Southwest Tasmania, it's very much a horses for courses deal.
Okay. Yeah. That's what threw me off then. I didn't realize it was a brand name. So I was trying to think how does this differ from a normal tent? Like, is there a bottom? How do you stay bug free in these things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's also places where, like, if you're hiking at altitude, often bugs aren't an issue. You know what I mean? So with those sort of places, you don't have to worry so much about the netting. But then again, if you're hiking in a place like what you mentioned before about the Arctic Circle Trail or Lapland, and it's just after the snow melt in mid-June, you'll want to have some netting, like unless you want bugs like literally just driving you mental like 24/7. Yeah, you want to have some netting on your shelter along with a head net.
So you also recommend quilts on your site rather than sleeping bags. I mean, I always thought of a quilt as something my Irish grandmother made. So I don't understand the difference. So explain the difference to me. I don't quite grasp that. And what are the advantages of a quilt?
I have an auntie actually who's a quilter as well back in Australia. She makes some really nice ones. It's okay. The big advantage of a quilt is that the thing about sleeping bags is that, so say a down sleeping bag, feather down sleeping bag, the down that you're actually lying on is compressed. So it's not giving you any warmth, you know what I mean, during the night.
Mm.
Now, quilts do, it's not like the quilt that your Irish grandmother makes. It's sort of, they're these quilts with, basically they take out the bottom section of the bag, okay? And so the section that you'd otherwise lie on, okay? And so imagine sort of almost like two-thirds or three-quarters of the sleeping bag still there, but the bottom section that you actually compress is taken out. And in replaced with that is a series of attachments, like two or three straps that you can cinch in. So if you do move around, you're not going to get those drafts coming in. And that's the main advantage. And also, with quilts, you don't have, with sleeping bags, you have the hood that you sort of pull up your head. Quilts don't have that. So, but the thing is, and this is one of the main tricks of going lighter too, is like items that do double duty, multi-purpose items. And if you look at, like, just say you're going on a hike in an area that's pretty cold, chances are you're going to have a hood on your down jacket. You might have a hood, or if you're wearing a sun hoodie, you might have a hood on your rain jacket, so all those hoods, and you might be carrying a beanie as well. So instead of sort of putting the hood of your sleeping bag over, you can just incorporate the hoods you use during the day at night.
What sort of weight savings are you talking about with that then?
Often it's around, 25, 30%.
Wow.
Yeah. So it definitely can make a difference. And, we were talking before about the big three and weight savings. For a lot of trips, if you were only going out for a shorter period of time, you like a frameless backpack rather than a bulky internal or even external frame backpack, they can be less than half the weight, and you can use, instead of having that internal frame, you can use, like, if you've got a sleeping mat, you use that as like a makeshift internal frame inside your pack. And but that said, like if I'm doing a trip where like the Badlands, or if I'm doing a trip where like Southwest Tasmania, that traverse there, I had to carry like 17 days food. In those situations, I will carry an internal frame pack just because I need that extra support, in the backpack.
I guess it makes sense. The less you're carrying, the less need you have for all this structure to distribute the weight on your frame, I suppose.
For sure.
So you talked about light trail running shoes, even on long journeys. So I assume that weight is the big one, like for boots, like the case for boots, apart from being wet, cold weather, would be if you're carrying a huge amount of weight on your back, you'd want the extra arch support, or is that not an issue for?
There's a lot of myths that around the need for heavy boots, like as far as they give you all this extra support and protection for your feet. And the thing about boot, like there's this whole axiom that 1 pound on your feet is worth 5 pounds on your back. I think it came about during Hillary's like Everest climb. I was up your back in 1953, but it's very true. Like the weight you feel, and it's not so much like, just say you're trying on a pair of boots at REI in the store or something. You might think, oh, these feel great, but you extrapolate that over the course of a hiking day, 10 or 12 hours, and you'll notice the difference. I mean, if you've got a big pair of boots on as opposed to a pair of trail runners, and the thing about like trail runners, often the grip, the outsole and the midsole, you'll get that same amount of traction from there. And as long as you've got like um, like the heel cup, as long as your heel area is stable, and like you can get all the stability you need in some really good trail runners like your La Sportivas and some Merrells and some other ones that you really need for most 3 season type conditions. And the other thing which there's this myth around is you need shoes. Like if you're in, like, okay, I've done loads of hiking in places like Tasmania and the South Island of New Zealand, and there's this idea that, you've got to keep your feet dry with. But the thing is, eventually, most of the time, if you're out in those conditions long enough, your boots are going to wet through anyway, and boots take forever and a day to get dry. Whereas lightweight trail runners, particularly breathable ones with non-Gore-Tex liners, they dry a lot quicker. You know what I mean? And when they are wet, they're still not going to weigh you down as much. And the main thing, you want to maybe use some gaiters to keep the debris from getting in the top of your shoes. But I've used those sort of trail runners in all types of conditions for the last 25 years now. And I know where folks are coming from as far as, the idea that, oh, you've got to wear boots when you're hiking, because I did it for the first dozen years of my hiking life. And I mean, I wore them everywhere from deserts in the Middle East to the Andes and everywhere in between. And so I'm not speaking out of my ass. It's based on experience in all these sort of different places that they just aren't necessary in most three-season conditions.
That's really interesting. I'm going to give this a try. So I'm prone to heel blisters as well. Like ever since one particular hike. Well, it was this Canal Trail in the Northwest Territories where I did gear testing for a travel magazine that didn't know anything about hiking gear. But like I was pretty broke back then, and my own greed got the best of me because we got to keep all the stuff afterwards. So I went along with this, and I had terrible heel blisters. And ever since then, I've kind of prone to it in the same spot over and over. So do you have any, how do you deal with the blisters or prevent them? Do you have any tips for me?
I think for folks, if there's a particular area that you have where you get blisters, it might even be worth pre-taping them before you start the hike. But I think I mean, blisters is one of those things where definitely prevention's better than cure. So, when you go to a shoe store or something, and often the salesman will say, "Oh, you just have that one finger at the back of your heel. That's all the space you need." But when it comes to hiking, it's different to walking around town or even jogging for an hour. If you're hiking day after day and you're going like 8, 10, 12 hours, your feet are going to swell. So you really need. It's more like two fingers you'll need. Like at the back of your heel, when you're buying your footwear. And a lot of people, including myself, find after you've done some of these long hikes, your feet, they actually get like, they feel like they swell, and you end up taking a bigger shoe size for the rest of your life. And
Wow.
and I think another thing, when you're actually on the trail is, during the day, if you are hiking over the course of a long day, take your shoes off during a midday break. Just let your feet air a little bit. Like if you do feel a blister coming on, tape it up before it starts getting any worse. Clean your feet at the end of the day before you go to bed as well. So it's just doing the little things, but being diligent about them. Obviously, you want socks that fit as well, because socks that are too big, you're going to have more friction, and also another one of the myths about you see a lot of hiking socks that are advertised as hiking socks, and they're these thick wool socks. But the trouble with a lot of those things is your feet, I mean, they sweat, and one of the cause of blisters is moisture. So a lot of these thicker socks, over the course of the hiking day, your feet are going to sweat, and it's like wearing waterproof shoes. Though they're not as breathable, so it creates a little sauna for your feet, so that you're more likely to get blisters. So often, unless I'm hiking in really, really cold conditions, I'll actually wear thin liner socks, like thin merino wool liner socks, when I'm hiking, that sort of dry really quickly, breathe, and I've got breathable shoes on. So, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to guarantee that you'll never get a blister again, but you certainly increase the odds of not getting it.
The pre-taping was really good. I think I saw that on your site, and I tried it. I just did a few really long day hikes in Georgia last year, the country Georgia, not the States. And yeah, no problems at all with that. That was great. The other thing that really helped me too was changing the way I tied my boots. Like I think it's called a surgeon's knot, to prevent the heel from slipping. You can't, it doesn't work going downhill because it just chokes off the front of your foot too much and gets too tight. But for going uphill or across steady stretches, that really made a huge difference as well, because it just stayed snugger. It didn't move too much.
Yeah.
So one of the things I love about hiking is its longevity. Like you can find a hike to suit pretty much any age. Like it doesn't all have to be ultra long distance or peak bagging. Even when you get old, you could do this. So what age related changes have you noticed in yourself as a lifelong hiker? Like I asked this because I'm 52 and I'm kind of thinking about the hikes I want to do while I still have the ability to tackle them.
It's a bit like maintaining a classic car. Well, what I imagine maintaining a classic car is like, you know, you can't just let it lie dormant, like sitting in your garage for too long, gathering dust. You got to take it for the odd wall around the block, and it's the same with hiking. I think and you just got to make little tweaks here and there, and also be cognizant that your body is changing over time, and you've got to adapt accordingly. And I think one of the main cornerstones of all my hikes over the years have been what I call the 3 A's, which is accept, adapt, and appreciate. And I think that very much holds true for, well, wilderness travel in third world countries, and also when it comes to your own body over time with hiking. Just accept the fact that you're getting older and maybe you're not quite as strong and quick as you used to be, but there's things you can do as far as, maybe you can't get off the couch and go out in the wilderness and carry a huge pack and do 20 miles straight off the bat. Maybe you might have to spend a bit more time getting ready before the hike. You know what I mean? As far as, okay, oh wow, I'm going to go hiking between Chamonix to Zanata. I really want this trail to go well. So okay, I'm doing this in end of August. Okay, so maybe in like May, June, or even before, you might start, like, in addition to your regular exercise, you might start carrying a pack around, a similar pack to what you might carry, just to get your body used to those sort of weights, carrying those weights, and even if it's around town, or if you've got a chance on the weekends to go out in the wilderness and just build up gradually, and just get your body more used to it. And because also I think, as you get older, you don't recover as quickly from injuries as well. So, even things like, before you start hiking at the end of the day, when you get up in the morning, if you're a bit stiff and sore, before you actually put the pack on, maybe walk for about 5 or 10 minutes around camp and do some light stretches and some light exercises just to get your body warmed up. Same at the end of the day, maybe do some stretches and stuff just to make sure if your calves feel a bit tight or your hamstrings, before you just hop in your sleeping bag and have something to eat, just make a conscious effort to do a bit more stretching, so, I think if you do those things and you keep yourself, you try your best to keep yourself just generally fit all the time, then, I've seen some amazing hikers my mum's 78 now, going on 28, and she goes a walk every morning, and she still clips along at like 5-6 k's an hour. And I've met folks in their 80s. To this day, maybe the person who's had the biggest influence on my hiking life was this Swiss guy by the name of Mark, who I met in the mid-90s on a hike across. I did this hike called the Alpine Pass Route, which goes from the border with Liechtenstein, a place called Spargans, to the border with France, with Geneva, and it goes over like 16 mountain passes. And I was like in my mid-20s at the time, and I remember getting close to this village. I think it was called Kandersteg or something, and there was this dude on the pass, and he was there in a blue rain jacket, and we started chatting, and he was 66 years old at the time, and we started chatting, and he just had this way about him that it was almost like part of the landscape. He had this Tom Bombadil, type color. And we ended up hanging out together for a couple of days, and he just had this incredible love. Like he'd never done much traveling outside of the Alps, but he was on a first name basis with every mountaintop and every creek and every rock and every tree. And he just had this incredible love that shone through in the way that he spoke about it. And that's like 30 years ago now, but I still remember him. And I actually wrote an article a few years back partly about that, and just, it was called, I think, it's the little hikes that mean the most, because sometimes people get wrapped up in like these big, and don't get me wrong, I've loved my long hikes that I've done over the years, but I think often you can tell more about a hiker and the love they have for it by the amount of effort they put into going on these little hikes on a regular basis, rather than these big sort of multi-month adventures. And And this guy Mark was a personification of that for me. And he was 66 years old. And the other cool thing about this guy, he had this pair of despite what I've said about trail running shoes and stuff like that, he'd always worn this pair of Ryclay boots, and they were 33. They were half his age. They were 33. I remember him telling me they were 33 years old, these boots, and the leather was so soft. And he said all he had to do was take them into the village cobbler every 3 or 4 years to get them resold. But he'd had this for like 33 years.
If only that were so easy for knees. Jeez.
In addition to the hiking and stuff before the trip, as you get older, if you've got like, knee issues and stuff, even simple things like wall squats, or there's lots of other exercise. Like I've had occasional back issues over the years, and so I've always liked swimming as well. So deep water running, stuff like that, are really beneficial, and using the kickboard as well, and sort of I try to do planks really regularly as well, and just anything like that, so you can keep your core strong. And if you've got an area that is subject to problems, then if you really want to hike, you really want to get out there, then you do what you need to do.
One of the best things I found for me, because Berlin is such a flat city, if I'm gearing up for a trip, and I try to also kind of maintain that throughout the years, step ups on a box. I've got like a big wooden box and a backpack with some road salt. I bought some road salt at the hardware store, taped it up, and one of those is 10 kilos. So I got a couple of those sitting around. I'll throw one on, and I have a click counter on my phone, like with those old inventory things, when you're taking story, every click is one rep. So you don't have to, because I can't count. I keep forgetting, So you can listen to a podcast or something like this one, and just click the phone every time you step up and down off this box. And it's tedious as hell, but it was fantastic for like hitting the trail in peak form, and it just made the uphill stretches a breeze. Like you skip that kind of acclimation or acclimatization phase, when you're living in a flat city and suddenly go hiking in the mountains and your hips and arse are sore and weak. That's fantastic. That's like my go-to method around here.
Yeah. No, there's all sorts of different ways you can adapt. And even if you're, a lot of people think, oh, I'll look silly if I'm wearing a backpack around the streets and stuff, but what does it matter? If it helps you when you're going out on this dream hike you've got coming up, then yeah, I mean, it's worthwhile. And I think that's the big thing as you get older, just adapting and just placing a bigger emphasis on preparation.
Good. Yeah, great advice. So my final question, what's on your hiking wish list? Is there a route you haven't hiked yet that you desperately want to?
Really? There's certain regions that I'd go back to, parts of Alaska and Siberia. Patagonia is a place I'd love. I haven't been there for like 25, 30 years. Actually, there's a few areas in Australia, like the Kimberleys in Western Australia. That's a place I've never been to, which I've always wanted to go to. So that would be a place that I'd love to put a long route together through there. Sub-Saharan Africa is an area I haven't really been, so that's a place I'd love to explore. As far as a hiking wish list, it's a little bit what I was saying before about that guy Mark, and I just hope that I can keep doing these little hikes on a regular basis. Healthy and enough to do that, and obviously throw in a few of these trips to far-flung corners as well. But it's just been a part of my life for so long. It's just something which I hope to do for another 40, 50 years.
Oh, we'll be following it on your website. So thank you for your time today, Cam, and thank you for your advice. And to the listener, if you're a hiker, put Wanderlust Nordics and some of these other Wanderlust books on your Christmas wish list. It's a beautiful book, and it'll inspire your travels.
Well, thank you very much, Ryan.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Personal Landscapes. If you like the podcast, please give it a rating on iTunes and subscribe through your favorite app. You can find links to today's podcast and more conversations on Books About Place at ryanmurdoch.com. You'll also find a donate button if you'd like to contribute to the costs of the show. All donations are greatly appreciated.